Exploring the country of Laos for 4 weeks was an excellent adventure. The motorcycle riding itself was great, the people were wonderful, the sights and scenery we saw were fantastic, but there was something different from other adventure riding trips I'd been on. And I came to find out fairly soon that that's because I was an American riding in Laos. So I will readily confess to not being terribly diligent about researching and preparing for the adventure rides I go on. My tendency is to show up and to start wandering around and to let things unfold. I research some things along the way, and certainly much more when I get back and start digging through photos and videos that I've collected. But in the case of Laos, it was a different experience. I admit to having no idea what had gone on there during the time of the Vietnam conflict and America's involvement that greatly impacted the country of Laos. But I started finding out, and I must say, it affected me the entire trip. In 1962, there was a treaty signed in Geneva by many nations, all agreeing that Laos would remain neutral and no military activity would take place there during the conflicts. You can probably imagine just how long that agreement lasted. A major violation of that treaty was when the NVA, the North Vietnamese Army, established the Ho Chi Minh Trail. They went from North Vietnam southerly along Laos and Cambodia and back into South Vietnam to send troops and supplies down to the NVA and the Viet Cong, who were fighting down there to establish Vietnam as a communist country. In response, the United States also chose to violate the treaty, and they engaged in an activity there that would become known as the Secret War, a covert action to counter the North Vietnamese. The American effort did not involve sending troops to the ground in Laos, but what it did involve was a massive and sustained aerial bombing campaign that severely impacted many parts of Laos. This map depicts the official records for the bombing runs that were made over Laos, with a little red dot representing each such mission. You can see a lot of red dots up in the north, and especially so down in the southeast along the Ho Chi Minh Trail area. This reported ordnance drop would be the equivalent of averaging one bomb run every 8 minutes around the clock for 9 years straight. This is why Laos is considered to be the most heavily bombed country in the world. Those activities 50 plus years ago are tragic enough, for sure. But what really stunned me was the legacy this left. Based on those ordnance counts and the official failure to detonate rate, there is an estimated 80 million unexploded bombs on the ground in Laos today. These are known as UXO, Unexploded Ordinance, and they are still killing and maiming people all across the country. This situation was put in even greater perspective for me personally when I realized that the landmass of Laos is smaller than my home state of Nevada, and to think 80 million bombs laying on the ground today. This entire situation was pretty much inconceivable, and as an American from the country that was responsible for this, it struck me particularly hard. This whole tragic reality was made even more impactful for me when one day in Vientiane, the capital and largest city of Laos, we stopped by the Cope Visitor Center. This is the Cooperative Orthotic and Prosthetic Enterprise, a nonprofit that helps people who have been impacted by UXO with counseling, therapy, and prosthetics. They also have an educational mission to try to help prevent future injuries from the UXO. There are a lot of powerful displays here at the Cope Visitor Center, including actual UXO that have been recovered and diffused. There's also this simulated example of a cluster bomb, a particularly insidious weapon that, once released, opens up and scatters hundreds of these small submunitions, little bomblets that are about the size of a tennis ball. They're not intended to completely destroy any one thing. Instead, they're intended to maim and injure and maybe kill personnel. These represent a lot of the UXO lying around the country today, and they are somewhat irresistible, especially to children who pick them up and play with them. Other powerful displays at the visitor center included actual prosthetics worn by people who in the past were injured by UXO. Arms, legs, feet, hands. Particularly heart-wrenching were the small ones that were worn by children. I'm glad we stopped by Cope, but I tell you, it wasn't a particularly uplifting visit. It was only minor consolation, but I was at least glad to see that the U.S. government is participating in helping to mitigate the issues created by the secret war. Wherever I go adventure motorcycle riding, I always have with me my genuine Australian kangaroo leather bush hat. I'll admit there was a moment after learning about the history of this country and America's involvement that I thought maybe I should just tell people I'm an Australian, make it less awkward for everyone involved. That thought didn't last long, though. I said I gotta own this, so I told anyone who asked and some who didn't that I was an American. I even found some who could speak a bit of English, and I asked them, is there no animosity toward America and what happened here? To a person, they said no. That was a long time ago. It wasn't you personally, and life goes on. Without a doubt, the Lao are a kind and gentle and gracious people. I certainly appreciated that. I alluded earlier to the concentration of bombing runs you see up in the northern part of Laos. That was based on the North Vietnamese army having set up a base of operations there, both to support the war efforts in southern Vietnam and also to pursue war efforts in Laos, where they also sought to bring communist doctrine. One of the key areas up in that northern part of Laos is known as the Plain of Jars. It is a UNESCO World Heritage Site based on these unique archaeological artifacts that are found there. There are a number of sites where you can see these megalithic jars, these huge rocks that have been carved into open vessels. We visited 2 of these sites, and they are truly amazing. This UNESCO site is really well visited. There's lots of tourists that travel to this part of Laos specifically to visit the jars. You have to travel a ways on foot from this initial visitor center to get out to where the jars are, but it really is a super pleasant walk. You go out through this area that's filled with rice paddies and other types of agriculture. Once you make your way through that agricultural area, you go up into some small hills and you arrive at the location where the jars are. There's upwards of 100 of them there, all different sizes, massive structures. They're estimated to be about 3,000 years old, and no one's quite certain on their intended use, but some speculation is they were involved with burial ceremonies. That's actually quite believable considering the setting. It's just peaceful and serene, very much like a cemetery would be. There's a little irony in that observation about it being this peaceful and serene setting, because you'll see these depressions. Those are bomb craters. This whole area was severely bombed during the Secret War. The only reason you can be there today, inside a specifically fenced-off area, is that it has been meticulously cleared of UXO. One of the main organizations accomplishing this is known as MAG, the Mine Advisory Group, whose mission it is to work around the world clearing UXO and landmines to prevent injury to unsuspecting civilians. And as with the Cope Visitor Center, it's at least some consolation to me to see that the U.S. government is participating in the cleanup and to help mitigate the problems that were created during this secret war. We next visited Site 2 of the Plain of Jars, a much bigger, open, spread out site that had a lot of jars on it, but they were not nearly as concentrated as that first site. Looking at it from a distance, almost looks like a serene golf course with a bunch of sand traps in it. Of course, those are not sand traps. Those are all bomb craters. We also noticed these trench-like structures dug in, and later learned they were actually warfare trenches for the ground fighting that took place here. And here, too, I was at least pleased to see that the U.S. government is helping to preserve these sites and to mitigate the lingering aftermath. While they're visiting Site 2, we could see off in the distance this giant-ass Buddha statue up on a little mountaintop. We knew we had to swing by and see that thing on the way out. So we wound our way around the mountain and made our way up to the parking area, got off to explore this beautiful temple. It wasn't open, so we couldn't go inside, but we were able to walk around the base of it and get up on the upper level. Couldn't help but notice the temple looked so fresh and new, and sure enough, turns out the original one was destroyed in the bombing, and this one was rebuilt in much more recent times. Later that afternoon, we made our way into the town of Pon Savang, fairly close to the Plain of Jars location. This is a bustling town because this is the location where the tourists stay when they come to this part of Laos specifically to go visit the UNESCO sites. We found ourselves a really nice guest house for the evening and then went out to explore the town and to look for a place to eat among the many restaurants found there. One of the interesting places we came upon was called the Craters Restaurant. I guess they were just leaning into the local circumstance, but still felt a little macabre to be identifying with the tragic past that's affected the entire Plain of Jars. Ever catch the 1990 Mel Gibson movie Air America? Billed as a comedy drama, it was actually based around a real situation. During the secret war of Laos, the CIA established an airfield in the remote mountain town of Long Chien. Said to be the most secret place in the world at the time, this airbase never officially existed. Even Congress was kept in the dark by the CIA. When we became more aware of Air America and Long Chien's history, we became quite curious and interested in visiting if possible. We learned that this entire area was off limits to any foreign visitors up until just recently. As you might guess, that's all we needed to know to make this a must-see location. So off we went early one morning. We actually tried to get there the day before, but we got held up by an unexpected encounter with a lake. And it's just as well because it was a bit of an involved trip to get out there, one that we really wouldn't have wanted to make at the end of a long day. It may not look it, but the road itself was a bit unpleasant. Super rocky that was extremely hard packed, and it was miserable in places to even try to ride over. And here's the reason for the road's miserable condition. It's a haul route, traveled by numerous large trucks each day. And sharing the road with these trucks made it not only tedious, but certainly extra dangerous to travel. Then, as if contending with the truck traffic while traveling on this rocky, hard-packed road wasn't enough, there were areas that had standing water on it that made the surface really slippery and even more treacherous. This video can't do justice to just how noisy these trucks were as they drove along empty with their steel beds banging and clattering over those rough roads. About then was a good time to take a break from riding on the rough road and contending with all the trucks. So we stopped here at this little roadside cafe to grab ourselves some breakfast. I was thinking how punishing this rocky road must be to tires, and about then I started seeing these old carcasses laying around to prove the point. It wasn't long after the breakfast stop that we finally made our way up into the mountains a bit more and found the location where the mining was all taking place. At this point, it became apparent what the trucking strategy must be each day. The trucks head up in the morning empty until they reach this area, and then they queue up in a line that could have been nearly a mile long, waiting their turn to get filled up with the ore and head back down the road. Soon we began encountering the parade of trucks that were fully loaded and heading back the other way. This, of course, added to the tedious nature contending with trucks on both sides of the road. Soon enough, we made it past the mining area and the long line of trucks, and then not long after we reached our target, the small village of Long Chien, home of the infamous Air America CIA base. Once in the village, we didn't even slow down and immediately took a right turn to make our way out onto the airstrip, the one that never officially existed during the entire time of the secret war. The civilian pilots of the CIA's Air America flew non-combat missions all around Laos. With their motto of anything, anywhere, anytime, this was said to be the busiest airport in the world during its peak operation. We probably weren't a minute into our little excursion when we realized there's a military base immediately adjacent to the airstrip. And here were these two military guys out there watching us go by. I had just kept riding right on past the two military fellows, as if I didn't even see them. But I made it to the end of the airstrip and flipped around and started to head back. At that point, I noticed that one of our riders was in discussion with these two guys. I worried about what that might mean. I turned my GoPro off at this point, wisely I think, and pointed it to the ground. As we pulled up there, the three of us began talking to these two guys who actually happened to speak pretty good English. One of them pulls out his phone and starts videoing, telling us he's a YouTuber. He's pointing around the area and speaking in Lao, and then he turns to one of us and says, "Where are you from?" "Norway." "Oh, okay." Turns to the next one. "Where are you from?" "Denmark." "Ah." Then he turns to me last and says, "Where are you from?" And I said, "The United States." And he goes, "Oh." So he wrapped up his YouTube video, I say with air quotes, and then they wanted to take pictures with us. So they stood next to us in the motorcycles and took photographs. These guys remained cordial the entire time, but man, I had to wonder what that was all about. Or did I? So after that interesting little encounter, it was still late morning, so we had lots of time to still explore around, which is what we did. So we go innocently and naively riding around the whole area, including with the American guy having a GoPro camera on his helmet. It pretty quickly became apparent that the vibe here was different. Everywhere else in Laos we went, people would smile and wave at us, whereas here, they just kind of looked at us as we went by. Probably a combination of them not having seen foreign visitors up until recently, and the fact that they didn't know what the heck we represented. When I tried to find some information on where we could find gasoline, using my friendliest demeanor and my best pantomime, didn't really go well.
Sabadi! Is that up here? Fuel? No? Do you know where fuel? Is it here? Here? No? I almost stopped and talked to the guys at that shop. They would know more than this guy. They won't talk to me.
Yeah, but it's
Huh?
on the map. It's around these turns, and then on the right-hand side, quite quickly.
We bumbled around long enough that we were finally able to find the fuel station and get the bikes gassed up, but still, everywhere we went, people just looked at us in the strangest way, not at all understanding who we were or why we were there. But then I finally had my first breakthrough.
High five. Boom, yeah.
Because young boys giving high fives, that's just kind of universal. We started to find some really cool and pretty areas to ride through, and then more high fives. This really was a pretty little town. So green and lush up here in this valley and flowers everywhere. Not sure what the yellow ones were, but I think the red ones were poinsettias. Had an enjoyable time just riding around the area, getting out on the outskirts of the town and seeing where the people lived. It was really pretty, quite peaceful. Back to that part about just riding around innocent and naive, which we were. I saw an interesting looking development up on a hilltop, so I circled around to find it. Rode on in to check it out. Looked really nice. There was nobody around, so we just kind of poked along with obviously the video running. It wasn't until later I found out that this is actually a new government facility that is just being built. Looks like housing or something. I don't know if it was the wisest thing to be riding through there filming it, but I did it. Came upon some really fun little single track trails that took us around through the jungly areas. Considering the UXO issues that Laos suffers, this might be a concerning kind of area to be poking around. But then again, this is Long Tien, site of the Air America base. It's not a location where the US was trying to bomb anybody, so figured it was pretty safe to kick around.
It just gets smaller and smaller and kind of peters out.
I'm not sure if she's coming.
Yeah, that's cool.
I hope she didn't.
Yeah.
I don't have the energy to do this.
Yeah, we're done.
Yeah.
Let's go back.
But you can go on. It's
Yeah,
okay.
I went down until it kind of petered out.
Okay.
So after getting our money's worth by riding around all day, we found a really nice little guest house for the night. The fellow that run it didn't speak much English, but he was very nice and appeared pretty industrious. It looked like a fairly new place, and he was actually building another one there on the left. Same kind of structure he seemed to indicate. So here was another little interesting episode in our visit to Long Tien. I don't have any video or other photos, but I can tell you about it. This is a little restaurant that was right near our guest house. It's on the main road. So after we got done riding and dumped the bikes off, we sat out here at a table and had some beers and relaxed. Pretty soon I noticed a truck was parked alongside the road opposite us, and there was a tripod being set up and turned out to be a video camera. And the guy moved it a little closer, and pretty soon he moved it right across the street from us, and he was pointing right at us. We were the only ones in the restaurant, and he was just sitting there videotaping us. I can't blame them at all for being curious about who we were and what we were doing there. It was just kind of strange. I hated to put them on any kind of alarm like that, and I wish they'd just come over and spoken with us to learn more, but they were certainly checking us out, trying to figure out what exactly was going on. So after all that, we weren't really even joking when we said we hope we don't get a knock on the door in the middle of the night. Turns out we didn't, which was a good thing. The next morning we got up and set out here in this little cabana, and the fellow brought us coffee, and we had a nice relaxing morning. But we packed up our things and thought we'd better get out of town while the getting was good. But we had one more stop to make as we headed out of town. The former home of General Sung, the commander of 40,000 ethnic Hmong troops that were stationed here during the conflict. The Hmong were people who hated the North Vietnamese and were happy to fight with them, and the CIA was happy to give them arms and supplies to do so. It was a bit of a relief to clear town, but then it came upon a checkpoint that was run by the military or the police.
Okay. Oh, we got two more coming.
As we started our Laos adventure, we were told that we would probably never be stopped at any of these checkpoints, and that turned out to be the case. They would recognize us as foreigners and wave us on through. I was particularly happy for that on this day.
Sabadi!
And here was one of my favorite encounters on our entire Laos trip. We were outside of Pak Song, which is up on the Bulawan Plateau, a high altitude region that is famous for growing coffee. As it turned out, right across from our guest house was a unique little place known as the CC 1971 Cafe. As the tour bus out front would indicate, this place is a little famous, and people come from all over to experience the unique setting. This is a cafe that has been constructed inside an old building that suffered being bombed out during the secret war of Laos. Windows covered with stickers is always a good sign of a place's popularity with travelers. Within this bombed-out building is this wonderful new modern cafe, where only this portion of the damaged building was reconstructed. The remainder of the establishment retains the look and feel of the bombed-out building. Obviously, it's been cleaned up since that damage occurred, and it's been accessorized with some diffused UXO. But basically, patrons set out amongst this damaged structure and enjoy their coffee in the most unique setting imaginable. I found the old stairway that's mostly intact, and while it wouldn't comply with ADA standards, it can get you up on the roof where they have some tables and chairs set up, where you can also enjoy your coffee. Outside there are remnants of the war with damaged equipment, jet engine out of a shot down plane, no doubt, artillery equipment, and other paraphernalia. Inside there are also artifacts from that period of time, including some pictures on the wall that depict the munitions and weaponry that was used to assault this area. The CC 1971 Cafe is a most unique setting and a very enjoyable stop. I would recommend it to anyone who finds himself in the area. Our travels through the very southeast portion of Laos provided us with one of the most adventurous days of the entire trip. At this point, we were looking for a place to eat lunch, and our attention was grabbed by a very interesting looking establishment. Upon investigating further, we learned that it was a new development that was really still under construction and had no services to offer. But the stop there was definitely interesting and well worth the visit. Turns out this area is in the heart of the Ho Chi Minh Trail in one of the most heavily bombed regions of Laos. There wasn't enough English spoken here for us to get an idea of what this facility was going to become, but it was obviously going to be very nice. Signage indicated that a private UXO clearance company had been engaged to make this area safe before construction began. You can see some UXO remnants are used as part of the architectural features. There's also a display shelf that shows the various types of UXO that were found and diffused from this very site. This was a vivid reminder that this is one of the most dangerous UXO areas in all of Laos. It was then only a few miles down the road that we came upon an intriguing feature on a map that we wanted to check out. There appeared an alternate route that would take us off the paved road and run us along some trail that would parallel a river and rejoin the road later. I suppose this little adventure would fall under the category of a calculated risk.
It's just a little bitty trail. It's a little rough at the upper end here. She might not like, but there's tracks down it. People have been driving it.
What did you see?
It's a little single track. I went down a ways. I mean, it's a little rough on top getting through rocks, but down below, for as far as I went, it was fairly reasonable, and there's tracks. People have been driving it. You might not like going down it.
I might not like going down which one?
The top part.
Okay.
It's rutted in rocks, and you got to bounce your way along. I don't know.
I'll go and have a look. And now that we've just visited this UXO center, you're not worried about going a place like
I mean, it's a well-worn path.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of people on it.
Yeah.
I wouldn't get off the path.
Why don't you just go?
It was just following the river and just kind of going through the trees.
Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah, it's cool.
Yeah,
And again, there's tracks, so it must go somewhere. It must pop out somewhere.
yeah.
Yeah, it's on the map.
Ah, it's on the map even. Okay.
So we are on that for sure.
It's a proposal for maps.me.
So off we go down this intriguing little path through the thick jungle. It was a narrow trail and rather overgrown in certain places, but the surface of the trail was fairly obvious and you could see where you were going. But given where we were, it was a certainty that we were riding in close proximity to unexploded ordinances on both sides of this tiny trail. The key is not getting off the trail, and the main hazard would be if some ordnance was somehow rolled onto the path and you ran over it. But you should be able to see that as you go.
Need to have a check or?
It still looks like a trail, doesn't it?
My worry is not. My worry is UXO. Really, it is a big worry for me.
But this trail's on the map,
I mean,
right?
If something happens, we can only be called idiots.
Yeah, probably.
So I think it's it's fun, and maybe it's okay. How far is it further?
What does it look like on the map? It definitely gets smaller and smaller. I don't know, man. It gets more and more narrow and overgrown, that's for sure.
Yeah.
And it's steep.
I have a feeling that it might go all the way down to the river and then
It's going really steep right there, so
extremely steep
huh?
on the other side.
Yeah, it's
Back up.
it looks like it is heading down.
Yeah.
Think we should turn?
I think so.
All right.
But it was fun.
We had a great little trail.
So we carefully turned the bikes around and cautiously made our way back out the trail and up the little rocky hill at the beginning.
Heads up, I'm just gonna blast by you.
Thank you.
Yeah, you bet.
The notices are frequently seen around the country, and the warnings of danger are most certainly real. I hope you get to enjoy travels one day in Laos, but do take care in the land of the UXO. And by the way, after my return from Laos, I donated to both the Mine Advisory Group and the Halo Trust. Just seemed like the right thing to do.